Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and we're here for a session all about EDI integration best practices for Dynamics AX and Dynamics 365 for operations. Our speaker today is Glenn McPeak, CEO of Data Masons, and it's great to have Glenn back with us today for the event. As we get going, I just want to remind folks we do invite you to ask questions at any point throughout the event. Look for the Q&A block you should see to the right of the main presentation area, and just fill those in. I know Glenn will be leaving time for questions at the end of the session today. So without any further delay, I am going to hand things over to Glenn to get us started.
Thank you very much, Jason, and good morning to everyone who's joining us, or good afternoon, wherever you may be. Thanks for your attention, and my objective today is to talk about a particular topic that can be quite challenging in the context of any ERP solution, and particularly with the AX and Dynamics 365 for operations platform. So a little bit about myself and Data Masons. First off, I've been working with Dynamics AX 365 going back to the old days when it was called Exapta, dating back to 1999. So I've seen the solution evolve quite a bit over the years, and had worked in a lot of environments with heavy customizations and those sorts of things. So I'm going to talk about what we've learned over the last 15 years of developing EDI solutions for the AX platform, and what we see as best practices for companies that are perhaps in the process of upgrading AX and looking at what sort of customizations they might want to carry forward into new versions, and for companies that are looking to integrate their business relationships with their partners. So that's really the purpose of the webinar today. And so what I'm going to do is cover a little bit about what really supply chain integration is all about. For some of you who have done it in the past or currently doing it today, it may make a lot of sense. You may recognize some things, hopefully, but also learn some new opportunities for reducing the amount of effort, errors, time spent by your team members, entering data into the AX and 365 platform. Talk a little bit about what makes EDI so difficult in integrating it with AX, and then share 10 best practices that we've seen and recognized over the years, have seen a pattern of success or lack of success when it comes to these B2B business integration type of exercises with the AX platform. And we know that there are a lot of companies that are on the Dynamics AX platform, maybe 2012, 2009, perhaps even earlier versions, that are thinking about the future and Dynamics 365 in the cloud. So one of the big changes that has occurred with 365 is the way that you integrate data in and out of the application. So I'm going to talk very briefly about what those changes are, what's been removed, what's been added into the platform to make integration better and more robust in 365. And then I'm actually going to show a integrated demonstration of EDI into Dynamics 365. And for those of you that haven't seen 365, you'll see some still some familiar screens and processes. So 365 does have a lot of does resemble AX in its concepts and behaviors, but of course there's completely new screens and UI. And then, as Jason mentioned, set aside some time for Q&A. So let's get started. So supply chain integration is, from our standpoint, what we've seen over the years is trying to get the systems, the ERP systems, to talk to each other in a seamless manner. So whether you're interacting with suppliers or customers or carriers, logistics organizations, the ideal scenario is that your AX system is able to exchange business documents in a way that eliminates the human interaction with the system, so that the people, the workers, can focus more on value-added activities and doing their job without a lot of data entry and kind of non-value-added processes. So that's what we see as the ultimate objective, and to have those activities occur continuously, 24/7, 365. Now, when it comes to the terminology of getting these systems to talk to each other, the traditional term has been EDI, kind of like ERP. That stands for enterprise resource planning. EDI is a concept that dates back to the 1960s, but the concepts of what the objectives are very much the same. So, the format of the data, whether it's custom data or established standards like CXML or EDIFACT, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's the concept of these business transactions being delivered, received, and integrated in a seamless manner without user intervention. So this is more of a visual concept of these types of interactions, and it reflects a couple of ideas here. First off, that these business transactions that might occur between two parties, so on the left would be a customer, on the right would be a supplier, and those parties, in my example, they're both using Dynamics 365, and they're interacting with each other in a order to cash, or a quote to cash, and a quote to pay transaction cycle. And effectively, you see the same types of transactions on the inner part of the wheel, like RFQ, the response to the RFQ stands for request for quote, then the purchase order, the acknowledgement of the purchase order, the maybe purchase order change and change acknowledgement, etc. And those transactions interacting back and forth between the parties. So in an ideal world, the systems are interacting with each other. So for example, a purchase order is received, a item's not available to ship, the response goes back to the customer. The customer sends a PO change that says, okay, this item's been removed from the order, so there's an agreed, what the order is going to look like, and then the rest of the fulfillment process continues to the end, including the application of cash. So that's the ideal scenario. But if you notice on the outer ring, the way that the transport of the data could be, and the source of the data could be coming from many different avenues. So, for example, it could be coming in from a website like a Magento or a Shopify or Amazon Web Services. It could be coming in from data transport like Secure FTP or AS2 or a VAN So it could be coming in from a number of different sources, and it should all, be able to come in one platform. And that's the objective of what our organization does is to kind of handle all the interaction of these different types of formats, these different type of business documents going back and forth. And again, this would just be a basic transaction process between a customer and a supplier, and certainly only a fraction of the types of business interactions that companies might engage in. So a lot of organizations, when they're thinking of their B2B e-commerce initiatives, they're often just thinking, okay, I've got to do this, I've got to do it with my customer, or maybe let's make ourselves more efficient. Let's reduce the stress on our accounts payable team, and let's integrate invoices into accounts payable. But it can go beyond that, and there are a lot of organizations, and this is just growing, where they want to do more with electronic data exchanges to eliminate the burden on their end. So, and that includes customs agencies, third-party logistics or warehouses, trading networks, even banks and financing factors. All these organizations want to reduce the effort and the manual processes on their end. So we believe that those are opportunities to be explored. So what makes EDI to Dynamics integration so challenging? And for those of you that have worked in the Exapta and then the AX world for a long time, you might remember that many years ago, Damgard, who was the original developer of the solution, and then Navision, had an EDI module for Exapta 2.5 and version 3 that was removed in version 4.0 and replaced by the AIF. And one of the reasons that they removed that module was because they found that the amount of scenarios was overwhelming in terms of being able to deal with all the different types of transactions, documents, formats, business rule processing, all those sorts of things was so challenging. And they just felt that it was better to give a framework. So these are some of the challenges that they faced in most companies that are looking to integrate EDI into Dynamics as. So business rule processing, I mentioned that before, and that goes both ways, where there are rules for how the data should look when it goes into the AX 365 platform. But the partners themselves also have their own rules. So for example, a customer may say, when you send me an invoice for a product that was on a shipment that exceeded 200 kilograms in weight, we need to have this special value. Maybe it's a trailer number or some other value that has to be present in the document. So that type of business rule is something that you'd want to have enforced, and so getting those rules built into the system for one particular customer, for one scenario, those things can be quite difficult. Then there's the unexpected scenarios of, one customer wants to send one type of document to trigger a process like a shipment. Another customer wants to send an invoice versus a purchase order. That triggers the same type of processes, so unexpected scenarios. And then scalability when it comes to making this work for high volume environments. So that's been a long-term challenge for some organizations. And then customizations that often have to be implemented inside the AX platform to make EDI work. So oftentimes when we encounter companies that are struggling with their EDI initiatives, it's because the customizations have grown to proportions that begin to really inhibit their ability to use the system and to, of course, move to new versions. So those are challenges. When it comes to the data side of things, getting the references, the values that, let's say, one partner uses, say a customer calls an item, 123 in your AX platform, they may call it D100. And their units of measure and their prices and their, description of the item, they could be quite different than what you have inside the ERP. So resolving that type of information and many other different data elements can be a big challenge. A lot of times data comes in on transactions that really have no home inside of the AX platform. It's really not relevant to the way companies that use AX want to run their business. But the partner wants that information. So we refer to that as turnaround data, basically data that needs to be part of other transactions that are triggered by an originating document, like a purchase order. So that can be a big challenge. And then data structures between the transactions. Some the world of EDI can have very complex document structures that are often not supported by ERP platforms. So, just a simple example would be an order with delivery schedules with many destinations all on one purchase order. That could cause a lot of challenges in terms of getting that data into Dynamics in a way that suits your business requirements. So those are the types of things that happens with data structures. And then data issues, they're just bad data being sent, and how to deal with that bad data in a way that is streamlined and can be dealt with the partner efficiently. And then when it comes to partners, defining relationships. So for example, if you use a external warehouse, how does that relate to the data that's inside of the Dynamics platform? Is it the site ID, is it the location ID, or is it some other value? Just as an example. And then ongoing changes that the partners, mandate. So your partners' businesses are changing and their initiatives are expanding, and so that they can be more efficient or change their business model if they want to do that. So they could be forcing new changes and new requirements that can be a big challenge in an ongoing basis. And that's kind of the nature of these B2B business integrations, is that it's constantly changing. There's constantly more challenges that oftentimes drives customizations in the ERP platform if that's the approach, is to solve it by embedding customizations to make it work. So based on those challenges and the things that we've seen over the years, we've established what we think are good guidelines or practices that can really help you be more successful with a supply chain integration project. So if you're initiating a project and you want to, let's say, start automating your process with suppliers, and you're trying to decide, hey, what's the best way for us to do it? You might look at a data format, for example, an AIF document, and say, hey, that format's as good as any, so why don't we adopt this as the way that we're going to exchange data with our suppliers? Well, the answer is that that might not be a good idea because your, the format is really custom to the AX platform. It's not generally recognized as a standard. So there's standards out there that systems and other companies support. So it's always a good idea to begin your initiative by looking at evaluating what's the right standard for your organization and using it accordingly. I talked a little bit about the challenges of customizing AX and 365 for EDI, and even to the point that Microsoft decided that that wasn't the right approach. So trying to embed and customize the ERP to do all the hard work that's required for EDI is generally speaking, from our standpoint, not best practice. When you're evaluating a new project and a new initiative, and you're evaluating your options, your partners, and how you're going to execute that solution, understanding the ROI and the long-term cost ownership is not as easy as it would seem. So look at what sort of ongoing fees and transactions costs that might be part of what your initiative is going to be so that you can make the right choices for your companies. Scalability is a failure point for a lot of EDI integration projects. So we've worked with companies that have spent huge sums of money on projects that ultimately never gain success because of scalability issues. So make sure that the solution you choose is scalable. There are a lot of organizations, and Microsoft's included, that delivers tool sets to build out integration and EDI capabilities, integrating a Magento website or doing business with a large retailer like Aldi or Walmart. So when you make that decision as what's the best way to go, obviously you can take a tool set and you can build out an integration and ultimately a solution, but it could be a lot more work than you would anticipate. And at the end of the day, the supportability of it could be difficult. So, I liken it to, a person who says, hey, I want a house. Some people can build a house and they'll take the time to do it, and it could be very, very rewarding, but it could also be very difficult at the same time. So would you want something that's already built, or do you want to go about building it? So those are a decision point. I think something that's already built is better. It's not reinventing the wheel, as they say. And when it comes to ERP integration like a D365 or AX, we think that, and we've seen from our experience with it, that companies think it's going to be easy to integrate into an AX environment, but then they realize, hey, there's customizations here, and hey, tables can appear and disappear, and columns can appear and disappear based on the way the system's configured, and that can be very bewildering to a lot of companies that, let's say, don't have the expertise to do it. So you want to make sure that when you take on a big initiative like an EDI integration project, that you get the right people in the right organization. And Microsoft does a lot to help companies make the right decisions. So they've had a certification program around for a long time, which is now for D365, the AppSource program. So you want to find something that has been evaluated by Microsoft, has referenceable organizations that use the solution, and so certification is something that I think is an important characteristic. And there are organizations that propose a, quote, solution for handling EDI, but really what it is just more data entry screens. And for those of you that have ever worked with web forms or portals for handling EDI, you'll recognize the fact that not only does it not help you with the data entry process, streamline it in AX, but it actually adds additional data entry where now you're doing the data entry work on behalf of your partner. So it's not a best practice to use web screens to make that work. And then, different organizations have different requirements. Some companies have relatively low transaction volume. Some have high transaction volume. Others have experienced team members that understand EDI, and they have ROI dictates that doing it themselves is a better model than, say, having someone else do it. So you want to pick an organization that gives you the flexibility to deploy the solution technologically and then manage it the way that is best suited for your organization's objectives and goals. And then finally, you should expect fully automated processing, that something that can run at 24/7, 365. A lot of systems that have integration, achieve it based on the concept that someone's going to be hitting buttons and looking at screens and resolving errors as they happen, as opposed to having, let's say, an exception management-based solution. So make that part of your criteria when you're looking at solutions. So those are the 10 best practices. I hope that that they're helpful in guiding you in your future strategies. So what I want to talk about briefly was Microsoft's initiatives with Dynamics 365 versus the AX platform, and what's changed from an integration standpoint between AX and 365. So first, Microsoft removed the two primary vehicles for integrating data into AX 2012. The first one, the .NET Business Connector, which has been around since version 2.0 of Exapta, was removed in Dynamics 365 after a long history of saying it was going to be removed, but they kept perpetuating it, but it finally did get removed. And what was also removed was the application integration framework, which has been part of the AX platform since 2006 with version 4 of AX. They replaced those two vehicles with a new data entity-based integration framework, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. And then they also expanded some of the functionality in the DIXF to support these entity-based integrations. So previously in 2012, this is what the AIF looked like. There was a number of prepackaged services that came out of the box. It wasn't, there was 50 or so of them, but it took them a long time to build that library. And once you had a service established, or whether you created it yourself or you used one of the ones out of the box, then it would give you the list of fields that you could manage some of its behavior as well. What they did in Dynamics 365 is they delivered an entity-based framework, as I mentioned earlier, and rather than providing a relatively limited number of endpoints for getting data into the system or getting data out of the system, they introduced hundreds of endpoints, and they're continuing to release additional endpoints with each new release of Dynamics 365, which is great. So it makes it a lot easier to get data into AX and out of AX as well. So what you're looking at is a screen. It's a little hard to read, I understand, but it's the this is Visual Studio in the AOT, and the portion of the AOT where you can build your library of endpoints or leverage existing endpoints. And one of the big changes with these new endpoints is that the data format that is used to communicate with it changed from XML to JSON, which is a very standardized way for web services to interact with external systems. So JSON's been around for a long time. The format's a little tighter. It's easy to work with. The XML is fairly easy to work with as well, but it's less verbose, JSON that is, and so it's been a very progressive move on their part. So as far as getting data in and out of the system for 365, you're left to the following options, and the first option is you write a custom system that gets data in and out, and that was always a possibility in older versions, but now with some of the new capabilities, you've got other options as well. So the DIXF is something that existed in older versions of AX, and they've expanded it, which I'll get into in a minute. They also have introduced OData endpoints that are available through a RESTful web service. Previously in AX, the AIF endpoints were SOAP-based, so they've moved to a RESTful web service model. And then they are releasing what they call common data services, which are a way of accessing APIs through the OData endpoints a little bit more easily than, let's say, direct communication with the OData endpoints. So that's still that's still in the works. Everything that that works with integration now with D365 through the framework is through data entity types. And there are 4 types that are available, and it's important to understand what they can do or cannot do. So the base entity type, they just simply call data entity, and it's it's accessible for full update, read, write, create, and delete operations, and that's you know, probably the most basic way to communicate with AX. Now, companies, of course, make customizations to the AX D365 platform, and so they introduced what they call extended entities, which enables you to not touch a data entity that is delivered by Microsoft out of the box, and you just simply use these extended entities to address these new fields and tables so that you don't have to customize those base values. Uh, if you take multiple data entities and you combine them together, you'll have what they call a composite data entity. And composite data entities could be something similar, something like a sales order. So a sales order is made up of a header, a line. There's miscellaneous charges and potentially other values that hit multiple tables. And so in the way the model is built out, these complex type of relationships like a sales order would be addressed through composite entity. The one limitation of a composite entity is that it's DIXF accessible only. So that means there's no web service access for it to create data. So that's a big downside to it. And then finally, aggregate entities, which are effectively composite entities, but it's read-only, and it's really intended for reporting systems and Power BI. But it's accessible through OData endpoints, but read-only, no update or create capabilities. So the net result in D365 is that you basically have a much more robust way to integrate data into and out of AX without customizations and without working with the application integration framework, which had its own drawbacks. So what we've seen is very strong performance with it. It's got great messaging when you try to create a transaction and there's an error thrown because of the missing value. That the information is very understandable. So those are big positive impacts of the changes that Microsoft has introduced. So with that, I'm going to jump into a demonstration of our solution. And our solution is called Vantage Point EDI, and it's a true platform that handles all the communication, all the integration, all the transaction management, the reconciliation of the transactions between parties, so that you don't have to have a translator and then a separate communication system and a separate integration component, etc. Everything's in one platform with one interface. And the system is designed to follow some of the concepts I showed earlier. The slide where we showed like the quote to cash process. And so the menus are organized along the lines of the typical transaction life cycles that you see in an ERP platform, like a quote to cash, quote to pay. There's transaction life cycles for logistics and transportation. The automotive industry itself has its own nuances and process flows, so there's flow menus for that. And then product management, exchanging product data with suppliers, customers, warehouses. Those are important capabilities as well. What I'm going to do in my transaction process today, my demonstration, is I'm going to start with Dynamics 365. So what you're looking at is a sales order grid with the most current sales orders, and I'm going to download a raw EDI document, and I'm going to create a sales order, and then I'm going to go through a fulfillment process. And actually, the steps in the fulfillment I've set up in Vantage Point, just as an example, because you can customize you can create role-based workspaces for your functional users if you want to give them access to the processes manually. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to download data from a network. I'm going to integrate the orders into 365, and then I'm going to go through an acknowledgement process in D365. I'm going to send out a warehouse ship order request to a partner. I'm going to process a shipment in AX, and then I'm going to process an invoice and send out invoices to my trading partner. Now, I could hit the buttons to make all this happen, but we talked about automation earlier, and automation is a big thing for data masons. And so what you're looking at is what we call our EDI workflow scheduler. And what it enables the system administrator to do is to create process flows or workflows to make things happen. So for example, I have a process flow called inbound PO workflow. And the steps in that is simply here, download data from my network, send purchase order to Dynamics 365, and then generate a couple of reports. I've configured a purchase order report and as well as a PO change report in case I've received purchase order changes. You can easily add steps to and from and change the sequence of them right here, and also define what events trigger those processes. So it could be event-based or it could be based on a timer or a schedule. So in my case, this process is going to start when I start up the system, but I could have virtually any time interval that I want. So if I want to integrate orders every 2 hours, except for between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., I can define those types of frequencies and basically achieve the result that I want. So what I'm going to do for my demonstration is hit this button, which is going to start up the service that ultimately is going to download a new purchase order that's going to integrate into D365. So when this process, this PO workflow inbound process is completed, you can see it's busy right now, we're going to see a new sales order inside of D365. So I'll hit the refresh button like this, and you notice that my most current, oops, I lost my connection to D365. Let's try it again. You'll notice that I'm also receiving notifications of documents flowing in, so I'm actually receiving emails too. Part of what the solution does is it does automatic report distribution of inbound documents. So you can configure it to go to the right people so that they don't have to look to see if something's happened. They can get notifications delivered right to their phone or to their mailbox. So I have a new order out here, 859, which was created within the last 60 seconds. And I've just clicked the sales order number to open it up. And this is the order that was just created. So it's going to my partner, Target, and they've just ordered this mid-range speaker in a quantity of 60. Now, we've got some buttons here. One of them is this TLE button, which stands for Transaction Lifecycle Explorer. And what this does is it enables me to see the actual data that was received, as well as all the associated transactions. And you're going to see the screen update in a few minutes as I continue through the process. So the data that was received from my partner, Target, looks something like this. So it's a relatively simple data file that Vantage Point transformed into a sales order here. So that's quite a bit of data transformation and work to make that type of transaction from that little bit of data that we just saw on the screen a moment ago. So as I mentioned, we're going to generate an acknowledgement back to my partner, and I could go in here and change the order around based on availability of material, based on if is the price in agreement or other types of factors that I might want to change. And when I confirm the sales order, Vantage Point is going to know that this is what I'm acknowledging back to the trading partner, and it'll compare it to the original purchase order and make sure that the partner is, their requirements are met in terms of communicating those changes. Vantage Point is monitoring the D365 system for these types of transactions, and it knows which ones are relevant, so it'll pick out the right ones and send them out accordingly. So there's no customizations inside of D365 to do something special when a partner or transaction is related to EDI or not. It understands all that already. And that cuts down on customizations dramatically. There's a picking list process that I'm going to do now. And as I mentioned earlier, this is going to trigger a transaction that we'll see in a few minutes out to a third-party warehouse to ship product. And because this is a demonstration, the warehouse is not going to send me back a ship notice, so I'm going to generate a ship notice by doing a simple packing slip update. Now, in a normal warehouse environment, we would take the shipment information from the warehouse and we would do the packing slip update in AX. But again, I'm not going to receive anything from the warehouse partner in my demonstration. And then the final step of the process will be to generate an invoice. I'm getting notifications that processes are happening successfully. So if I drilled into them, I would see whatever it is that that it's reporting. For example, sending out the shipment notice or the warehouse advice. And those alerts can be turned off, which is often the case. But right now, I've got everything configured to let me know what's going on. So now I'm posting the invoice. I'm going to generate it to the screen so that we'll be able to see the invoice number and then tie it back ultimately to the transactions that we're transmitting out to our partners. So we'll wait a moment for that. And while we're doing that, I'll just explain that there are processes, for example, the POA or Purchase Order Acknowledgement Workflow Outbound. It's a process that's executing every minute. So it's actually busy right now, sending something out. We also have a WSO or Warehouse Ship Order. That process runs every minute as well. And so these processes are executing, grabbing little bits of information from D365, and for the incremental transactions, the new one that are EDI related, it understands all that and it sends them out accordingly. So we've got the invoice generated to the screen, and it's the CIV 000757. That's our invoice number. And when I come back to the sales order and I open up the TLE screen again, what I'm going to see are some additional transactions based on the schedule and what's been processed so far. So you can see that now I've got, in addition to the original purchase order, I have the purchase order acknowledgement. So this is the transaction that was transmitted to my partner, which is Target. I've also sent out a ship notice. ASN stands for Advanced Ship Notice. Oops, it's a little bit premature, so waiting for it to refresh. And while we're waiting for those other transactions to complete, I'm going to come back to AX and also show that that the data that came in on the original PO that might not have a native home inside of AX is available as well directly from a sales order in AX. And what this is going to do is show me that data that came in on the originating document with all the EDI details, like, for example, the sender information, all the dates that they transmitted, all the address information that they transmitted that may not have a home inside of D365, and references, which could be quite, extensive list of these references. So they're all these are flowing in. So let's come back to our Transaction Lifecycle Explorer screen. I'll refresh. And now we're starting to see more transactions. So in addition to the POA and the ASN, we have an invoice, and we have this WSO transaction, which is the warehouse ship order. So this is the instruction to my warehouse partner to send out this data. And here's a copy of the invoice that we transmitted a few minutes ago, again, for this MSDW Webinar 2. And it's the invoice number that we saw on the screen a few minutes ago, which was 757. So all this is being done without customizations in the D365. These are just opening up URLs that have basically a line of code that opens up these screens to show all the data through APIs back to Vantage Point. And again, without customizing AX, achieving tightly integrated transactions, letting AX do what it does well, and Vantage Point doing all the hard work of the integration, business rules processing, formatting, and compliance that's often needed for EDI to work well. So hopefully my presentation today provided some useful information regarding things that have changed in the AX to D365 platform, but also provide some insight and guidance into your exploration of solutions that might be a fit for integrating your business relationships into the AX or D365 platform. And with that, Jason, again, thank you. I would open up the floor to questions if anyone has any.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. And we do have a few questions in that we'll start getting to here. And I want to remind folks, if you do have any other remaining questions, please enter them into the Q&A right now, and we'll get to as many as we have time for. So the first question that came in a little while ago, Glenn, do you provide a database in the back end for more permanent storage and access? In other words, the data that we want to keep but not inside AX.
Yes, that data that I showed here came from a separate database that houses that information. So this screen right here. And all the transactions are managed. Hang on.
All right. If there are new ISV solutions installed and ISV data tables need to get data from EDI files, how does it get to those ISV or custom tables?
I talked a little bit about that when I talked about the different types of entities. So those additional tables and data elements, they can be addressed through extended entities as opposed to the native data entities that come out of the box. So extended entities is the answer to how we get to that data. So it's addressing those tables in the same, virtually the same exact manner that we address, say, for example, a sales order table.
All right, there are a couple folks asking where does the Data Masons solution reside, on-premise or in the cloud, and if on-premise, how would they bring data to AX if it's on the cloud, or how would partners connect to the cloud?
So that's a good question. And Data Masons supports deployments in the cloud as well as on-premise. So that speaks to the flexibility model, that slide that I talked about before. So cloud or on-premise. And the way that it communicates is no different whether it's in the cloud or on-premise. At least in the case of D365, we use web services through OData endpoints to talk to 365. And in the case of AX, could also be web services as well through AIF.
Okay, someone wants to know if there is any intermediary required to use Data Masons, for example, Sterling Commerce, something like that.
No, Vantage Point is a all-in-one platform. So it handles the data mapping like a Sterling Commerce, Gentran integrator, or a Sterling integrator type of solution. And the transport of the data is in your hands, so you can move data through a van. We provide van service if you want, but you can use FTP, AS2, whatever is best practice for your organization.
All right. Does the EDI platform infrastructure design support high availability capabilities?
The answer is yes. So the development of the solution is based on Microsoft best practices, and in our cloud solution, it's based on a high availability deployment model. But of course, is contingent on the data center that the system is running in.
We have several other questions here. We're near the top of the hour, Glenn. Can we continue taking questions, or do we need to cut things off at the top of the hour here?
No, I can continue.
Okay, great. And a couple folks asking about slides and recordings. We are recording today's event, and we'll be sharing information about how to access that recording, and I think whether the slides are available as well in the next few days here. Okay, so another question: and if people are entering questions into the chat, please try to paste them into the Q&A. That's your best chance of making sure we find it. How is the exchange done behind? For the PO inbound message into an AX sales order? I think it's asking how is it done behind the scenes. Is the web services used, or is it using DIXF?
It's using web services. We do not use DIXF.
All right. How does Vantage Point EDI map data fields to data entities?
We have a mapping system. We call it the Universal Data Translator, which has all the instructions and rules on that. That's part of the transformation of the data. So you can't just take an item number and plug it into a field and say, okay, that's going to work, because the item number, as an example, may not match anything in AX. So there's a whole data transformation process that resolves all the data into the AX context, and then each data field is plugged into the entity, based on the business requirements. So it's a sales order, PO to sales order map.
All right. Someone wants to know, is your solution browser-based or forms-based?
It is it's forms-based. It's an app, so it works. We have a mobile version of it for controlling the scheduler through a WPF app, and the rest of it is also app-based.
Approximately how long does it take to set up a trading partner?
That's a tough question because there are a lot of factors that go into it. But depending on the environment, you could have a new partner configured and ready for testing within minutes.
How many clients have moved over to the 365 or the Dynamics 365 platform using Vantage Point cloud-based translator, and have most of the bugs been worked out on these new platforms?
Okay, so that's asking whether we have any active projects with customers migrating to the D365 platform. We currently have 6 migrations in progress. One of them has already gone live. As far as the bugs being resolved, of course, there were learning experiences that we went through, but a lot of it had to do with the back end in D365. So, I can't say that there are any bugs out there, but of course, there's always, as we roll out new transactions, we're learning new things. But right now, it's quite strong for the 25 or so document integrations that we have already released.
All right. Is there a tool for migration from AX 2009 to D365 in Vantage Point or in out-of-the-box AX? And if there are both, which is better and why?
Well, actually, the back-end Vantage Point system remains the same. Primarily, there of course is a new user interface. So if you're currently using our system today, you can see that the interface looks quite different. But by and large, it's the same data set behind the scenes. So an update is required. The legacy version of Vantage Point will not work with D365. However, the update, it's a relatively simple undertaking to update to the new version of Vantage Point. There's no quote migration process. It's just it's more of an update process, and then it's just a matter of pointing the system to the new AX or D365 instance in the cloud, which is just configuring it in the company setup. Now, of course, there's new maps that have to be applied. There's testing, but there's no quote migration of the data from Vantage Point.
Okay, while automatically creating a sales order, if I want to pick default values from custom tables, how could we do it?
Well, that's a difficult question without more context, but just to say that the map itself can leverage variables from within Vantage Point that could be maintained there. They could also be default values that exist in AX, so we synchronize those default values, and then the map leverages it to plug those values into the into AX. We've done projects where we've actually looked up data in other systems. So, for example, the current price of a commodity like copper, grab that piece of information and then make it part of the integration map going to a custom field in AX. So there's a lot of different ways to populate data into, let's say, custom fields in AX. There's a lot of different ways to make that happen.
Okay, what's the best way to integrate bank transactions?
Well, there's a number of different bank relationships that we've dealt with over time. So different banks have different capabilities. One of the most common ones is a lockbox transaction, so where we're taking the cash received and applying it into AX through a cash journal. However, there's a lot of different scenarios that can occur with the bank. So we have, as an example, we have customers that get credit approvals from the bank, so they have to send a transaction. In some cases, it's an invoice, even though the transaction hasn't been invoiced. We have to create an invoice from a sales order or a purchase order, send it to the bank, get the approval from the bank, and then act against the release the sales order in AX so it can be fulfilled. So there's a lot of different types of interactions that can occur with a bank, so I would just need more specifics to address them.
How easy is it to correct and resend an EDI transaction, for example, an 810 or an 856?
It's quite easy. All the transactions that have been sent are all held inside of Vantage Point in one table, and you can just simply right-click and retransmit a transaction. So if I want to retransmit that invoice that we sent earlier today, I can go in there and edit the transaction, but then set it to what we call a ready status, and now it's going to be retransmitted a second time after I've made the changes. So let's say I needed to add a value like that trailer number I mentioned earlier. You could put the trailer number into the invoice and then retransmit it.
All right. If Data Mason's Vantage Point EDI is using web services, then how are they able to keep track of data import and export status?
So every time that we retrieve data from AX or particularly in D365, we log which transactions have been evaluated. So we're only looking at the incremental ones when we pull data back. So it's only getting the newest transactions that haven't been evaluated previously. Now there's a way to manually override it to look at a specific older transaction, but that's how we do it.
All right. Is your solution compatible with purchasing portal functionality in D365 operations, or does it replace it?
Well, it's absolutely compatible with it, so we don't do anything that would compromise the functionality of the portal. However, the concept of having a portal where your vendor would go in and enter data into a web form which is what the portal is, that could be replaced with an electronic exchange and eliminate that data entry process on the part of the vendor. But it's 100% compatible with it. But it could replace it as well.
Okay, will Vantage Point integrate with AX 2012 R2?
Yes, we support all versions of AX going back to 2.5 and all the releases and CU updates.
All right. And the final question, what is the footprint in AX? In other words, what type and how much customization is done in AX? Or I guess maybe the question was for D365, so what's the footprint?
So, well, the answer is the same for both versions. We don't introduce any customizations into AX to make it work. Now, in my demonstration environment, I do have two buttons that I was leveraging just to illustrate the way that you can seamlessly see data. But these are buttons with a line or two of code that opens up a URL. So for example, if I click on the TLE, you'll see that a new screen opens up with just a URL isolated to that specific transaction ID. So it understands what's the key transaction ID, and it gives you all that data. So we're not customizing AX at all, except for to have the button that opens up the URL in the right context. The other screen that I showed with the data is opening up the data through an API from within AX as well. So there's really no core customization inside of D365. The same applies to AX or Exapta. We don't customize the Exapta at all to make it work. That's one of our big value propositions, is not to customize AX to make EDI work.
And Glenn, there's just a follow-up to that asking who's writing the web services to create the orders and so forth.
We have standard maps and web services out of the box that we provide. So we can develop all the maps and integration for whether they're for custom services or custom tables or not. But we also provide the tool set if you want to do it yourself. So you have the choice of either having data masons do it, or you or your partner could do it with our tools and with our systems.
All right, there's one last question here. Are there already usable mappings, for example, for Edifact or D96A?
Yes, absolutely. All the standards are provided out of the box. So when you configure your system, you can just go in there and import them in. We've got standard maps, not just to meet the standard, but also to handle, here's D96A is somewhere in here. All of the standards are, are provided, but we also have maps that have specific application to a partner, like, General Motors. So General Motors has certain rules and formats that they require, even though they use Edifact. But one map for one partner that uses Edifact isn't necessarily going to work for another.
All right. Well, I think we are at the end of our question queue here. So we'll begin wrapping up. If anyone does think of any other, okay, there's one other question. Are flat file formats available in templates as well?
Yes, they are. Both CSVs, fixed length files, virtually any data format is supported.
Very good. Well, thank you everyone in the audience for so many questions. Much appreciated. And one more question. Do you have a list of implementation partners you are working with?
Well, we work with a lot of the major AX partners worldwide, but not many partners do implementation themselves. So we typically provide the services, but we do, allow our partners to do implementation if they're trained. But we don't have a list of, partners published that do implementations at this time.
All right. Well, I'm sure for any further questions, the Data Masons team is happy to have you reach out and take those. Glenn, thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through everything today and answer so many questions.
Great, thank you.
All right. With that, we are going to end today's event. We have recorded it, and we'll be sending follow-up information on that shortly. That concludes today's event. Have a great day, everybody.